When you simplify fractions, you're just making a very special equivalent fraction. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is how to make an equivalent fraction, and then we'll talk about how to simplify fractions or how to put them into simplest form. When it comes to equivalent fractions, what you want to do is either multiply or divide the numerator and the denominator, both of them, by the same non-zero number. The reason it has to be non-zero is, think about it. If you multiply a number by 0, it's just going to be 0. So that's not going to give us an equivalent fraction. It's just going to turn our fractions into 0. So here's an example. If you look at this first fraction, 1/4, if we're trying to find a fraction that's equivalent to that, what we're going to do is we're going to multiply and divide our numerator by the same amount. And if I'm just looking for any equivalent fraction, I can pick any number to multiply or divide by. But in this case, I decided I was going to multiply both my numerator and my denominator by 2. So I start off by taking my numerator, which is 1, multiplying it by 2, and I get a new numerator that's 2. Then I'm going to do the same thing with my denominator, which is 4. I'm going to multiply it by 2 and get a new denominator of 8. So I can say that 1/4 is equivalent to 2/8. Now this goes both ways. I can either multiply or divide. So if you look over here, I'm going to take the fraction 2/8 this time, and I'm going to make a fraction that's equivalent to 2/8. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to divide both my numerator and denominator by the same thing. And in this case, I chose to divide by 2. So I'm going to divide both my numerator and my denominator by 2. So the numerator 2 divided by 2 gives me a new numerator of 1. My denominator of 8 divided by 2 gives me a new denominator of 4. So I can see that 2/8 is equal to 1/4. Now, most of the time what's going to happen is you're not just going to be creating these random fractions that are equivalent, but you're going to be looking for one specific equivalent fraction. Like if you look down here, what you'll see is we're given a fraction, and we want to create a specific equivalent fraction. The way you do that is you have to figure out, okay, if I wanted to turn this denominator into that denominator, what do I have to do? And remember, we're either multiplying or dividing. So to go from 4 to 12, I multiply by 3. So whatever I did on the bottom, I have to do the same thing here on the top. So if I did the denominator times 3, I'm going to do the numerator times 3, and 3 times 3 gives me 9. So 3/4 is equivalent to 9/12. Now we can use this idea of equivalent fractions when we want to put fractions in simplest form, or if we want to simplify fractions. We're going to multiply and divide our numerators. In this case, to make a simplest form fraction, we actually divide our numerators and denominators. But we want to divide them by a very specific number. And the number that we want to use is our GCF. So the first thing we have to do is find our GCF. Now the more you do problems with GCF, the better you're going to get at finding your GCF. And there will be times when you can look at these two numbers and know in your head what your GCF is without doing any work. But since we're new to finding GCF, I'm going to actually show you how you would do it on paper. So the first step in finding your GCF is to list all of your factors. And remember, when you list your factors, you want to list them in pairs. So I know that 1 times 18 gives me 18. That's a set of factors. I know that 2 times 9 gives me 18, so that's another set of factors. And I know that 3 times 6 gives me 18. And those are all my factors for 18. I'm going to do the same thing with 24. So 24 is going to be 1 times 24. And then it's also going to be 2 times 12. It's also going to be 3 times 8. And finally, it's going to be 4 times 6. So those are all the factors I have in these two numbers. Now, to find my GCF, my greatest common factor, I have to look at what they have in common. They both have a 1. They both have a 2. They both have a 3. This one has a 4. They both have a 6. And then they don't have anything else in common. So my GCF here is going to be 6. So the first thing we do, according to our directions, is we find our GCF. And the GCF of these two numbers is 6. Now my next step is going to be to use that GCF and divide both my numerator, which is 18, and my denominator by that GCF. And what that'll do is it will create for me an equivalent fraction. So take this numerator, 18, and divide it by that GCF. So 18 divided by 6 gives me 3. Then I'm going to take my denominator and do the same thing, divide it by my GCF. So 24 divided by 6 gives me 4. So 18 over 24 in simplest form is 3/4. Let me show you one more. Okay, this time we're going to take 6 over 15. Step number 1, find your GCF. So let's list all our factors for 6, and there aren't that many this time. 1 and 6, and 2 and 3. And then we're going to list all our factors for 15. So I've got 1 and 15. 2 doesn't go in, I get 3 and 5. So first thing, find the GCF. And the GCF is 3. So my GCF is 3. So now I'm going to take this fraction, 6 over 15, and I'm going to divide my numerator by that GCF, and I'm going to divide my denominator by that GCF. And it's going to give me an equivalent fraction. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 15 divided by 3 is 5. So 2/5 is this fraction in simplest form.